My name is Justin the Clue, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're talking about famed mainland Chinese director
Zhang Yimou.
And Will said that because I know I was going to screw up the pronunciation of his name, because I look at it and I want to say Zhang, and I know that's not what it is.
I mean, look, am I pronouncing it right? Possibly not.
Yeah,
Zhang Yimou.
Yeah, I got to think like Zhang.
Zhang Yimou is, like, without a doubt, the most famous mainland Chinese film director. Is that too much of an overstatement?
Absolutely. No contest. This is the director that his movies have been able to kind of get an art house attention and more of his movies than any mainland Chinese director.
I mean, Raise the Red Lantern and Hero alone are two of the most famous Chinese films, and also two films that I think embody what interested us in him as a subject, what interests many people in him, because he seems to be a guy, if you know anything about him, it's that he emerged in the 1980s with a series of movies that were consistently banned in mainland China.
Every single one of them. But one of the reasons that he does have international attention is they played international film festivals.
Yes.
And I think there was some mystique there as well, that like the people watching them, they're great films, but they can't play in his home country. And he kept making films.
During this period of both like China opening up to the world, but also China presenting this image of being kind of like this scary foreign empire that suppresses its own artists, you know? But then also in 2002, he makes a movie called Hero with Jet Li, which I'm sure many of you listening have seen, that is kind of the cinematic embodiment of the new China.
And it's also a reaction to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Totally. And it's a movie that embodies, we'll get into it, but to put it shortly, Zhang Yimou became, in addition to that, he directed the opening ceremonies of the 2008 Beijing Olympics.
And the 2022 Olympics as well.
So in the international imagination, he has this strange kind of dual reputation as a guy who started as, and I think it would be inaccurate to call him this, but nevertheless, his reputation was as a sort of dissident, or as a sort of like guy who was constantly running up against the Chinese censors, telling the truth about the country, and then later became this guy who like was, you know, the lickspittle to power in some way, you know? And I don't think either of those is entirely true or entirely fair, but...
Well, it just boils down to that if you become the most famous mainland Chinese film director, then China's going to make him do propaganda films, period. Like, that's what's going to happen.
And he's made certain decisions across his career. Like, I think he was very frustrated early in his career of working in the system and constantly losing. And then at some point in the middle of his career, he said, I am going to work the system and start winning. And that's what he's done ever since. And I think for a lot of people, certainly for me, when I first discovered him, I had a little trouble with that. I had a little trouble understanding him.
Were you like, how dare he sell out?
Well, maybe a little bit, but I'm older and wiser.
When did you discover him? It
was Hero, I think.
Okay.
When Hero came out in 2004, and in America, I saw House of Flying Daggers, which came out the same year. And
House of Flying Daggers got a pretty big push, too.
That's right. And then I also, at that point, checked out some of his earlier ones. Like, I remember watching Raise the Red Lantern on a really bad DVD that was released.
Well, he was one of those filmmakers that was like, how are we supposed to see his films? Like, well, you got to get the Hong Kong VCD, that like bad audio, bad picture, but at least you can watch the film, right?
That's how I saw most of his early ones. Like, at my local library in the Chinese film section, they had a ton of his movies all on bad looking DVDs. That's how I saw Judo. I don't know how to pronounce that, but that's how I saw Story of Q Ju. Sorry, I'm embarrassing myself. All these names I don't know how to pronounce. But anyway, a little bit about Zhang Yimou's life and career that will hopefully give some context, because few filmmakers have lived as interesting a life.
Why, he's a Nepo baby, right?
I think you're thinking of Chen Cage.
Oh, I didn't know Chen Cage was a Nepo baby.
Well, I mean, it's so funny to call these guys Nepo babies.
That like literally were sent during the Cultural Revolution to like work on farms.
What you need to know about Zhang Yimou is he's probably the most famous of a group of filmmakers termed the fifth generation of Chinese directors.
And his father was like a dermatologist, but during the Cultural Revolution, he was pushed into working at Farms, not labor camps, farms in the country.
Well, to give a little background on Chinese film history, see, the first generation, that was early filmmakers in Shanghai. The second generation, this was a golden age, the 30s, the 40s.
I looked at our local bookstore, and they have like 2 gigantic volumes of like Chinese films, like a dictionary. And you can just flip through all these like mainland Chinese films. And I know I will not recognize 98% of them.
The third generation were the quote-unquote revolutionary film workers. They made early socialist realism in the 1950s. And then the fourth generation, which was this generation that was kind of cut off. These were the filmmakers who were taught in the early 1960s, but the Cultural Revolution came and prevented them from making films. Chen Cage's father, Chen Cage is the other most famous of the fifth generation. He was one of those filmmakers, and Chen Cage, as a teenager, joined Mao's Revolutionary Army and denounced his father. And his father, went off to work at a labor camp somewhere. And Chen Cage has worked through the trauma of that ever since.
And if you are not aware of the Cultural Revolution, we're not going to do a big history lesson here, but basically it was Mao's answer to, oh boy, I don't feel like I have a firm grip on power anymore. Can we condemn all intellectuals or anyone in power?
Well,
and use the use to do so?
Yes. It was this great purge of
the proletariat coming together, rising up
against so-called rightists. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a history teacher.
I'm a tanky, so nothing wrong happened here.
I think pretty much anyone would say that it was a great big disaster for the whole country.
Yes.
So anyway, the fifth generation consisted of these 150 or so filmmakers who were in the first class of the Beijing Film Academy after it reopened in 1978.
And the legend goes that Zhang Yimou had to, really push because he was like in his late 20s and that he didn't actually have any experience that would lead him to be let into this Beijing Film Academy. But thanks to the photography that he had done through a camera that he had bought donating his blood, he was able to be let into the school.
Well, Zhang Yimou was born in 1950, and his father was a member of the Chiang Kai-shek Kuomintang army, which in the Chinese Civil War was the losing side. Mm-hmm. And several of his relatives migrated to Taiwan after Mao's Communist Party took over. And so for his whole upbringing, for his whole childhood, Zhang and his family were of a lower social class. Mm-hmm. They were excluded from much. I read this week, for example, that Zhang was barred from becoming a member of the Youth League, which was a requirement, a prerequisite to joining the Communist Party. And after high school, during the Cultural Revolution, he spent several years, working as a peasant in the fields, working at a textile factory. So he and all these fifth-generation filmmakers really experienced the trauma of the Cultural Revolution firsthand.
Yeah, forcefully, because all the kids are like, let's get him out of here and put him in the farms.
But growing up, he became very fascinated with film. The only films that could be screened in China in the 60s and 70s were, Chinese propaganda films, but he loved those too. Mm-hmm. Became interested in those.
There's power in those films. If you see them, like, for example, one of the big ones is, it doesn't go under Taking of Tiger Mountain. It has a similar title, but it's like one of the opera films. Because wasn't there, boy, we're getting into the weeds here, but there was a certain amount of kind of like entertainment that was allowed. And like Taking of Tiger Mountain was one of those.
Right.
So I have that book on my shelf. The Chinese government did English translations of Tiger Mountain. It is insanely violent.
Wouldn't it be fun to do an episode on some of those movies?
Like a Chinese propaganda episode movie?
Yeah, it's like...
We could do some old ones. We could do some new ones.
Everyone knows Zhang Yimou, but who's seen those movies? Wow.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We got to do that in the future.
So anyway, in 1974, when he was just 24 years old, after the Cultural Revolution, he's in Shanghai. As you alluded to, after Mao's death in 1976, there was a great opening up. The Beijing Film Academy opened up, and he applied to be in it. Didn't get in at first, even though he passed the exam because he was too old. But after an appeal, he made it in. And he studied for 4 years to be a cinematographer. Part of that class included Chen Cage and all those filmmakers.
And all those filmmakers collaborated on films afterwards. Zhang Yimou shot Chen Kei's first film, Yellow Earth.
And Yellow Earth came about, it's very interesting. After they graduated, Zhang, Chen Cage, and another filmmaker named Zhang Zhongzhao, they were all assigned to this movie studio, the Guanxi studio. But there was no work for them there. So they lobbied the Ministry of Culture to make their own independent projects. This is 82, 83. And from this came the very first fifth generation films.
It's a war film.
The first fifth generation film was by that filmmaker Zhang Zhongzhao. It was called 1 and 8. But the first to achieve international recognition, really the first mainland Chinese film since the 30s to get any kind of international exposure, was Chen Cage's Yellow Earth. And that was a movie that, again, was controversial domestically, controversial, with the higher ups, because it was perceived as, if you look at it a certain light, it might depict China negatively to the world. Now, Zhang Yimou was, as you said, the cinematographer on Yellow Earth, and there was a producer at another studio who was very impressed. Had a certain fund at his studio. The profits from more commercial movies could be used to make more artistic movies. And that led to Zhang Yimou making his directorial debut, Red Sorghum, which was also his first film with Gong Li. And that film really rattled the Ministry of Radio, Television, and Film. But it also received international exposure, played the festival circuit.
That's the thing about every one of these early films, is that the people in charge are like, we don't like this. Like, this is, painting China in an offensive light. It looks down on the history of it. And then, Zhang is like, how about I make one more? And it's like, well, how does he keep getting away with this?
And from that point on, the Ministry of Radio, Television, and Film wasn't funding a lot of these movies. His next one, Judo.
Oh, you skipped Codename Cougar from 1989.
Codename Cougar, yes. That one doesn't have a great reputation, does it?
No, and that's like about an aircraft hijacking. That's like a one for me, one for them movie.
Well, his next personal one, Judo, the funding for that one came from a Japanese company, and that was banned in China. And then the next decade of his career was banned in China, basically. But again, they played the festival circuit. And I would imagine that, for the higher ups in China, it was a very complicated thing, because this is a period where they're trying to enter the international stage. So
everything's fine down here. You can bring all your manufacturing, no problem.
Well, they want to present the image of a modern country. And part of that is, it's great to have these great Chinese filmmakers who are on the international stage, but they're projecting an image of a weak nation,
Yeah. Can't you just make propaganda blockbusters? And then they get made and they go out and people are like, well, we don't like these. How do we win?
So Raise the Red Lantern. We both watched that this week.
We did indeed.
Great movie.
Gong Li stars in it as a young ex-university student who is sold into a life of being a wife of a man that you never actually see in close-up.
That's right. You only see him in long shot. He's this nobleman. It's, in the early 20th century, might be in the 1920s. It's at this big compound that he lives in with his 4 wives.
That's right. Wife 1, wife 2, wife 3, wife 4. One is the oldest. The youngest is Gong Li.
And wife 1 has been abandoned long ago.
And it's all about rituals and the fact that this man is in power. By every night, he decides which wife he wants to be with. And there's a big kerfuffle that happens where red lanterns are lit. The wife that is chosen gets a massage on her feet, which that massage creates noise, which makes the other wives jealous. So what comes up from that is all of the wives are vying for the attention of this man and basically destroying themselves to get there.
Yeah, destroying each other. And there's also a maid who works there who desperately wants to be one of the wives, and that adds further complications. So the Gong Li character quickly becomes alienated by this system, but is not an uncomplicated hero either. I mean,
she's selfish.
She treats her servant abominably. She does things that lead to her servant's death.
I really wish this film had a mainland Chinese forced upon it happy ending where they're like, what would be the happy ending of this movie? And all the wives lived happily ever after with the man.
Yeah, I mean, what can you say about this movie? It's extraordinary. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's very red.
Very red.
Hence the title.
You're just stuck in this compound. You never see outside this compound.
When you think of Zhang Yimou, I think now you think of the post-hero, very visually kind of opulent. While all these early films, they're all in that kind of what I associate with the mainland Chinese drama look. Cold, cement, big, empty.
Well, the perception of Zhang Yimou as this sellout filmmaker. I was trying to think this week about how accurate it actually is, because these early ones, I mean, this movie, because it's slow, it's deliberate, it projects itself as being like an art film, you know? It is a melodrama, too.
It is. Well, I think that the reason it got so popular was because of all the scheming between the wives, and that there's an inherent drama in that, and an escalating sense of action until the end of the movie.
And I think some of these early movies, because in the 80s and 90s, you know, it was a popular selling point on the festival circuit to say, oh, this is a banned film. This repressive government that we don't like doesn't want you to see this.
This is the movie the man doesn't want you to see.
And Westerners like to think of these filmmakers as being dissidents, you know, but I genuinely don't think even at this time Zhang Yimou would have regarded himself as a dissident. I think he was somebody who wanted to make good movies.
That have kind of a dramatic backbone and are interesting.
And it's more interesting to tell a story about Chinese history or any country's history that has some of this.
Like, well, there's not that many mainland Chinese films that get out there, and this one is all about how, you know, the patriarchy is terrible.
And the patriarchy is deeply embedded into our country's bones. Yeah.
And it's almost a way that, you know, if you look at it, it could be a metaphor for the Chinese government themselves, pitting all the Chinese people against each other.
It could be.
Yeah, so you don't have to go that far. But then again, I know Will is making the argument to unban this film, which is not banned right now, but that it's just a dramatic story.
Well, I just think, like, I don't want to fall into the old trap of being
he's speaking for an entire nation.
Yeah, or projecting something onto
that's
him
not there.
That's just like Western imperialism, you know?
Yeah. The story of Q Ju is almost him trying to be like, all right, I will tell the most undramatic story I possibly can, where any of the big dramatic incidents happen off screen.
Right.
The film is about a man who was kicked in the nuts by his town chief. We do not see this nut kick. Wasted opportunity. But also setting up the whole movie. Gong Li plays the nut-kicked man's wife, and she decides that she wants an apology from the town chief. And the town chief won't give it. He abides to the rules that the government body above him says, that he needs to pay for any medical expenses. But beyond that, he will not apologize for the kick in the nuts that happened.
And so the movie is like 100 minutes of her going from office to office, trying to get justice.
Yeah, and she doesn't really understand the legal system to a certain extent of like, why do you get a lawyer to do this? Like, why do I have to sue the chief? And the notable thing about this is that Zhang shot the movie on the streets of modern-day mainland China, and he did it with hidden cameras. So when like Gong Li's walking through the streets, the people are not, you know, kind of aware that they're on camera.
Now, was this not a period piece too, though?
It is not a period piece. It feels like a period piece, which again is that Western imperialism coming into this.
Right.
But like I looked and I think it's supposed to be set modern day because they just shoot it on regular streets.
Okay. Sorry, it's been forever since I've seen it. You know, Judo is a movie that when he was making it, he made it a period piece to appease potential censorship, basically, because he wanted to say to the censors, look, it's not about China today. It's about it's the 1920s. Like, what's the problem? But of course, that movie was banned too, because after Red Sorghum, he's perceived as like a problem director as well. The international reputation of these films is both, you know, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, because if he represents everything, then everything is going to put under the microscope for what it could mean.
And they're not stupid. They can tell that, you know, these movies have certain anti-authoritarian tones, or anti-authority tones, at least.
And, you know, he made To Live, which is one of his more famous films as well, and Shanghai Triad with Gong Li. But, like, in the late 90s, he actually went like, all right, okay, stop banning my movies. Like, this is enough.
So I kind of lose touch with them between that Gong Li period and Hero.
So I watched Keep Cool from 1997. And this is him being like, I can do Wong Kar-wai. Like, it's set in the modern day. It stars who was one of Chinese biggest stars. Then he's kind of gone away for a while. Jiang Wen, who was in like Let the Bullets Fly. He's the one who directed and starred in that movie.
Right.
And he plays a man that's like obsessed with a woman, and a bunch of like complications happen. The entire film is shot handheld, like slightly pointing up, like shamelessly mimicking fallen angels. Reading about kind of like criticism from around the time. A lot of people like this movie. Personally, it didn't really do anything for me. I could feel that Zhang was trying something different, but I feel like he didn't quite get there in that same kind of like off the cuff Wong Kar-wai style.
Now with Hero in 2002, this begins this period that, I mean, it seems like a one for them, one for me period where from that point on, he basically becomes China's national filmmaker.
Well, I can't speak for him, but you get the sense that, like, he does like these movies.
Totally.
Like, Hero is not a movie that he's like, oh, I gotta make this. Like, with House of Flying Daggers, I watched it for this podcast because I was interested of like, okay, so Hero is kind of like a deconstruction of the idea of this. Like, it's telling the story, but it's also doing it in a way that is making you very aware of the structure of it. Kind of like a meta take on this, while still having all the same action that you would expect from a movie like this, choreographed by the guy who is the wuxia god, Ching Su-tung, director of A Chinese Ghost Story, who also directed a film, I'm just going to move past it really fast, called A Terracotta Warrior, that he did in 1989, that starred Zhang Yimou and Gong Li, and it's just like a fluffy action film.
Hero was the culmination of a long strategy on the part of China's film industry where, I forget what the film office in China is called, but, in the early 90s, they began letting in a certain number, a quota of American blockbusters that would get theaters back up and running and would get people into the habit of going to movies again. It had been years since movie-going was a really vital industry, and so stuff like Jurassic Park, stuff like True Lies would start to play. And then Hero, after Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which was, I think, a Taiwanese production or a Hong Kong production, that came out, huge hit all over the world. Not a huge hit in China, but it was such a hit all over the world.
For a number of reasons, like that Chow Yun-fat's Mandarin is not that hot, that the film itself, to the eyes of people who consume this all the time, like, what's novel about it?
Well, it was written by a white guy, too.
Yeah, and it was directed by someone from Taiwan. I'm going to be honest, like, I like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
I like it,
that
too.
wire work, clunky as hell. Because Ang Lee demanded to shoot it a particular way that Yu Wo-ping did not want to shoot. When they're like running and their feet are just like moving in the air, Yu Wo-ping would not shoot that stuff like that.
Oh, well, I like it. I'm not complaining. But anyway.
I'm complaining. I'm behind the mainland Chinese audience.
Well, anyway, in 2002, Hero is this attempt not just to ride on the coattails of Crouching Tiger, but also to say, we can make movies that can compete with these Hollywood blockbusters on their terms. It was a $30 million super production with Jet Li, big mainland star, and
Hong Kong stars.
And a rogues gallery of all the biggest Hong Kong stars. Tony Leung, Maggie Cheung, Donnie Yen, Zhang Ziyi, who's also mainland.
What's interesting about this film, watching it now, I need to explain how I would have consumed something like Hero back in the day. I probably saw a cam version recorded in China with no subtitles.
Really?
Yes. So I would have watched it, and I would have watched it just for the fight scenes, because it's like, this is what I want to see.
Did you not see it when it came out in theaters?
I don't think I saw it in theaters. I did see it, afterwards with English subtitles.
This was a big event for me in theaters when this came out. I was in heaven seeing this movie in theaters when I was 15.
You're like, give me the kiss of the dragon, Jet Li's up on screen.
Well, at that point, I was definitely like, I knew enough to know that, like, oh, this one's from China. This is one of the real ones.
But what's interesting about watching the film today is, like, the fights are not that exciting because they don't really have a dramatic backbone in the story that is being told.
Well, they're beautiful.
They're beautiful, but they're not exciting.
Yeah.
Watching them separated, they're exciting because there's a story that you build in your mind, and, there's internal storytelling that's done very well. Like, Jet Li is telling a story to the Emperor in this film, and then the fights are happening. All the conversations, everyone is very stoic in the way that they talk. They're all shot in really close head and shoulders. And that once you realize through this movie that, like, oh, these stories we're being told, like, they are not true. They're just fabrications that Jet Li is building to achieve his mission to, spoiler alert, I mean, you'll figure it out 10 minutes into the movie, kill the Emperor.
Well, if I can tell you how the movie plays differently for me now, I feel like when I was 15, I watched this movie and it felt like an art film.
I've never seen anything like this before.
And now it plays like a blockbuster, It actually doesn't seem as exotic as it did back then.
Well, the thing with the action in this movie, if even you were a casual Hong Kong cinema fan, which I don't know if I would even call myself that at that point, like, Ching Su-tung is like, let me open the old bag of tricks. There's nothing new here that he's doing, but it's presented in a way where it's so pristine and beautiful. Like, Ching Su-tung was having guys jump on their swords to continue fighting in the air as they're falling back in his directorial debut, Duel to the Death. Here, when you have them, like, very gently in slow motion bounce off of the water and fly in the air, it's the same principle, but you've never seen it presented in a way that's screaming at you, this is important, this is beautiful, which it is. I'm not going to deny that.
And there's also just a lot of cool ideas in the movie.
Yeah.
Like, in the early fight between Jet Li and Donnie Yen when he like glides through the air through the little pellets of water, or that big set piece where all the arrows are attacking the calligraphy school, and
they're all kind of like defending it or standing their ground as they get mown down.
I mean, ideas like that are like honestly count for more than the choreography itself.
And at the end of the day, the film is all about, listen, I came here to kill the emperor who killed my family, but if he's uniting all of these disparate places, maybe there's value in that, even though the movie makes no effort to actually give you that in any dramatically compelling way.
Right. So, ultimately it's a movie about sacrificing the self for the collective and for the importance of a unified China. And this is also important too, because as the culmination of a long project and the beginning of a whole new project for the Chinese film industry of being like, we can create blockbusters that will compete and in fact overpower their American competitors in our market, and they will project our messages.
I need to, again, highlight the fact that one of the thing about mainland Chinese films, even Hong Kong versions of those films, they have alternate endings. It's kind of like the Hays Code, where like the villain will be punished, everything will have a kind of acceptable moral. That's why you get the ending of Hero. I even remember at the time people being like, that's an odd ending. But Yimou had been doing it, his entire career, is like Keep Cool, which is all about a guy that wants to cut off another man's arm. That's what the whole back half of the movie is about. At the end, he writes a letter apologizing for all of his misdeeds.
Well, I mean, this isn't Yimou, but one of the odder cases I remember was Johnny To's Drug War, which is, such a great movie, by the way. And it's a mainland production, and it's, this.
I love Drug Wars.
Yeah, I love that movie a lot. And then, it's this thriller about the cops trying to, working with this drug dealer to hunt down the bad guys, basically. But because he's a drug dealer, he can't survive at the end. And so after all the action is over, after the whole movie's done, basically, it ends with this very bizarre and unpleasant scene of just him like getting a lethal injection and
you just see him
screaming,
dying.
No music.
Nope. I feel
movie over.
Johnny Depp knows exactly what he's doing there, as opposed to the more tacked on alternate endings like, hey, if you watch Infernal Affairs in mainland China, don't worry, Andy Lau gets taken into prison at the end of the movie.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, from this point on, Hero onwards, he alternates between big Spielbergian martial arts fantasias and smaller Spielbergian dramas.
Well, he also gets to kind of follow his muse, I guess, when he remakes Blood Simple in 2009.
Right, a simple noodle story, I think it was called.
A woman, a gun, and a noodle shop.
I mean, I've gone in and out. I mean, he's been very prolific over the last 15 years, and I've seen a good amount of them. It's funny. Like, I saw the one Coming Home, which was a reunion with Gong Li from maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And it's a story of a man who's been sent off to like a labor camp during the Cultural Revolution. And he comes back to finally meet his wife, and his wife forgets him. And she goes to the train station every week waiting for her husband to come back. And eventually he comes to peace with the idea that, well, she'll never recognize me as her husband, but I can still live with her and go to the train station with her every week. And I bring this up because we just watched one of his newest movies, 1 Second, which is also set during the Cultural Revolution and seems to me no more incendiary than that. In fact, it seems less incendiary, and yet...
1 Second was banned.
Well, that's the thing. And like, one of the strange things about the system in China is it seems the rules change a lot.
Yes, and we've talked about this many times, I feel like, but like, the censorship mode in China, you have to do it by mail, and it can take weeks or months to receive a reaction.
In 1 Second, there are 3 characters. There's a guy who's escaped from a prison camp in the Cultural Revolution, and he's trying to get this canister of film that has a newsreel that has 1 second of his estranged daughter in it. There's just a shot of her, working in the Cultural Revolution.
It's like a propaganda movie, and he just wants to watch that.
Yeah, he just wants to see that. And then there's another character, an orphan girl, a young girl who wants the same can of film so that she can like melt it, and
you get money out of it.
Yeah, exactly. Just for the raw materials. And then there's a third guy, Mr. Movie, who just like...
He's a projectionist.
Yeah, he goes around the country projecting these propaganda films. And it's all about the conflict between those 3. Now, there are obviously no reasons have come out for why that movie was banned for 2 years.
There were technical difficulties, Will.
When it was pulled out of the Berlin Film
That's
Festival.
right.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing you can tell just by watching it is it has this tacked on ending that feels like, well, they shot that later. But while no reasons have been released, probably one of them was just the
it makes it look miserable.
well,
though.
like there's a lot of poverty in the movie, as there was during the Cultural Revolution.
And like the Chinese officials would rather we don't talk about that.
I mean, it's strange though, because that movie Coming Home from 8 years ago, I mean,
things change though.
yeah, it does, because I think that movie makes it look worse than 1 second does.
Well, the weird thing is, like, you watch Taking of Lake Changi, the 2-part movie. That makes war look absolutely miserable, where everyone dies. Like, it does not look good. But they're like, yeah, that's fine. We like that. Like, don't worry about that.
Well, anyway, 1 second though, I thought was a terrific movie.
I love 1 second.
Yeah.
My only criticism, and you may have seen this on Letterboxd, it is a love letter to celluloid. Like, I don't think I could think of any other fictional film where celluloid is just loved, clean, shown
Film
on
itself.
screen.
I mean, the whole mid section of this movie is the can of film that's in question. It falls out, it gets dispersed, it gets all dirty, and the whole community who wants to see the movie come together to help clean the film.
Yes.
Now that's good communist art, by the way.
It is. The issue is 1 second is shot on digital.
Yeah.
And boy, does it look like digital.
I know.
If Zhang can't do it, no one can. Like,
Well, I will just say, I think most of the Chinese blockbusters I've seen in the last 5 years look awful.
Yeah.
I think 1 second looks pretty good.
yeah, I think he does what he can with the technology.
Like Zhang Yimou is a forceful image maker. He's very good with, big vistas of the Gobi Desert.
If someone could let me know what cameras, Chinese productions shoot, I would love to know. Like, I was looking into it. They had like a bootleg Red they had made for themselves, but like, what actual technology do they shoot on? Sony cameras? I don't know. Because that also really affects the way that images can look. Because like, when we think of mainland Chinese blockbusters, we think of like very oversaturated and sharp.
Sharp to the point of being almost dead.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a lifeless image, which is strange. Cause it's sad because I feel like 10 years ago, Chinese movies, they would come out and you'd be like, oh, they're so beautiful.
Well, I mean, China for the longest time, they had like the last Technicolor lab.
Wow.
Which is what Judong is printed on in like 1990.
I mean, all the Wong Kar-wai movies, the Zhang Yimou movies like House of Flying Daggers looked so fucking good, and now they look awful. God.
Yeah, but 1 second though, good movie. Would recommend. It felt like it kind of like slipped through the crack. Did it come out when like the pandemic was happening?
I think it must have.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a really beautiful movie, just great characters. The love letter to cinema aspect of it, I think, is very powerful, but it's also a very bittersweet movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like those final moments, very bittersweet.
And it was nice watching it, just knowing, because I've obviously run hot and cold on Zhang Yimou. Some of his recent movies, like he made The Great Wall with Matt Damon. I heard Matt Damon on Mark Maron's podcast talking about making that movie, and obviously knowing that it was terrible. And he said he knew it was doomed when halfway through it, he made a suggestion, and Zhang said, "Oh, that's good, but this movie's for your audience."
Yes. It's like Zhang was like, I'm going to phone this one in. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And Matt Damon, as he said, realized, no, wait, I want to be in one of the good ones.
Well, too bad.
Yeah.
You can't be Christian Bale in The Flowers of War, another forgotten film.
I mean, The Flowers of War, which I've also seen, is The Pits.
Yeah.
I mean, just terrible.
I stared at it and I went, do I? And I went, no, life is too short.
Yeah, I don't know why I saw it. I guess
you were probably like, oh, this is a big important film that's coming out.
I think why I saw it? It was because like, oh, the new Zhang Yimou movie.
Exactly. But we both went to go see Full River Red, the new Zhang Yimou movie. And this one is mega popular in China. I think it's in like the top 5 of all time of mainland China right now.
And I thought it was quite fun.
It's just him having a ball with... The premise is at the end, you'll hear this very famous Chinese poem. It's like, okay, he uses that kind of like backbone to just make a one long night like French farce where like no one is who they're presenting as who they are. There's a mystery that needs to be solved. Bodies keep piling up and people are running from one location to one location in this giant, big fortress. Super fun. Long, but very fun. And you feel that he's very present in the film in a way that like, The Great Wall, he's like, oh boy, okay, let's just get this over with.
So yeah, I mean, there have definitely been times when I've lost a little faith in him over the years. There have been times when he's disappointed me, but 1 second in this movie, Full River Red, I don't know. It's just good to know he's still there, that he's still doing stuff.
I wonder
he's
if
still good.
After like Full River Red, is this one for them or for him? Like, will his next one, could he make like a small drama or something like that? Especially that it's been such a huge success. Or will the people in charge be like, how about you make us, an anniversary film about the war? I mean, he already did. We skipped over one, Snipers, that he did with his daughter.
Right, which, I want to see that.
It's fun. Yeah. It's very fun. And we even like skipped a bunch of them. Like Cliff Walker, I think is really good. That's like the spy film that he made that actually has a Japanese action choreographer that worked on it. Super violent, of course, at the end, even though the message is completely against what we've seen for the last 2 hours. There's a on-screen text being like, this is the one for the revolutionaries out there. It's like, oh boy. And Shadow. So he's still at it. I feel that he's in more of a groove right now after the Great Wall. Like, I like Shadow. I like 1 Second. I like Cliff Walker. I like Snipers. I like Full River Red. Like, he's really in his groove now. Just, I really hope that the government doesn't make him forced to do like, oh, we need another Hollywood hit now. Like, go make one of those. It's like, he's done enough, guys. He's done enough.
Well, before we get to letters this week, I do want to say that we are celebrating another great Chinese filmmaker, Jackie Chan, at an upcoming event.
That's right.
If you are in Toronto on April 18th at the Fox Cinema.
Great cinema in Toronto.
Yeah, in Toronto, in the Beaches neighborhood. We are inaugurating our new series, Important Cinema Club Masterpiece Classics. And for our first movie, what else could we choose but Rumble in the Bronx?
This is a film, because we wanted to go with a Jackie Chan one, and we thought about it. We're like, do we do Drunken Master? Do we do Police Story? And we finally came to the conclusion of like, let's get one that like never plays in theaters.
But that everybody likes.
Exactly. And we can give it like the context around it. There'll be a pre-show. There'll be tons of stuff. I'll be selling Golden Ninja Video Blu-rays.
It'll be Woodstock.
That's
guys.
right. And if enough people come, will we be doing this monthly, Will? Perhaps?
Perhaps. Who knows?
Yeah. So if you are within a 1,000-mile radius of Toronto.
If you have access to an airplane that lands in Toronto.
Yes. We expect you to be there.
So once again, April 18th, 7 p.m. Go to foxtheater.ca to get your ticket.
Yeah, get them now before it's sold out.
No fear, no stuntman, no equal. Justin, do we have any letters this week?
We do have letters. As per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. Our first letter is from Christopher, and he goes, hey, Justin and Will. There's a name I've been hesitant to suggest for an episode, but after the recent run of serious filmmakers on the ICC, and after Mark Hansen mentioned him on the latest Bay Street Video podcast, I feel the time is right for me to finally say it. Zalman King. First, he's Canadian. That's Auteur points right there. Second, I've heard his films described as atmospheric and dreamlike, just like a Pitchapong Wirasikul. Oh, I almost got there.
Wirasathakul.
There you go. Lastly, he's due for reappraisal since he was always thought of as a forgettable softcore hack, but now people are quick to point out he told stories from a female point of view. And he was an artist that was, as David Duchovny said, more concerned with the color of the drapes than showing any TNA.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was 13 years old, sneaking down to the TV and watching Red Shoe Diaries on mute, I was not concerned about the drapes. At least not those drapes.
Well, yeah, you were concerned by another.
Anyway, I do want to correct the letter writer, though. A Canadian filmmaker, he was born, the ICC fact-checking department has been on this. He was born in Trenton, New Jersey.
And he died in California.
So, I mean, perhaps, maybe I wouldn't be shocked if he shot in Toronto, though.
Yeah, we need to talk about, like, Canadian filmmakers like Bob Clark. Oh, wait, I'm getting a telegram here. What? He wasn't Canadian either.
Oh, my God. Well, anyway,
who do we have?
I actually love the suggestion of Zalman King.
I've never seen anything Zalman King has ever made.
I mean, again, aside from watching Red Shoe Diaries on mute as a teenager.
For 2 to 6 minutes.
Okay, and something that the listeners need to understand back then is
City TV.
I didn't have a laptop when I was 13. I didn't have
a phone in your hand?
It was not
sound down.
It was not the easiest thing in the world to see naked people.
If you were in Ontario, City TV did show this stuff.
Baby Blue movies, and also Showcase.
Bleu Nuit. Yeah, Showcase was the Zalman King channel.
Now, I have never actually seen any of Zalman King's. Like, I've not seen Wild Orchid or Two Moon Junction or whatever else he did. I would kind of like to, honestly. I think it's a good suggestion. Like, maybe he's good. I don't know.
The letter continues. Also, please do it so I can tell my mother that when she caught me watching the Red Shoe Diaries at the age of 14, I was actually studying a great unappreciated filmmaker and not securing my place in hell.
My brother.
P.S. Next marathon, the entire Emmanuel series.
Well,
That is a tall order.
Okay, how entire are we talking about here? Are we only talking about the Sylvia Kristel ones, or are we going to go into Emmanuel in Space?
Don't forget Black Emmanuel. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah, I think that's too much.
That's like saying the entire Django series.
Yeah.
It's like every film that has Django in it. Well, thank you very much for that great suggestion. And our next letter is from Allie, and they go, "Hello, I'm really enjoying your podcast. I love movies and first fell in love with international cinema with Blue in 1993, which I still remember picking up on my local Blockbuster video. Rest in peace. No, Blockbuster stinks.
Yeah.
Die.
Yeah.
But, it did have an important place in a lot of people's, young discovering movies heart.
And hey, Blue, is that the Derek Jarman or the Krzysztof Kieślowski?
That second one that you just said. I like how you put a little, spice on that.
I did this because I thought I was going to mispronounce it, and I was hoping I could distract people.
The letter continues. During COVID, I decided to dive back into that passion and made a list of about 304 foreign films to marathon through, which I actually managed to do, and even briefly suffered under the delusion I might have become fluent in French, Japanese, and German. I did not. Did you ever think that, if I watch a lot of Hong Kong movies, I'll come out, I'll understand Cantonese, right?
No, I never thought that.
I remember reading, the Kung Fu Cult Cinema Forum, and the reviewer being like, how do I not know any Cantonese at this point? Considering all of the movies that I watch. The only way to learn is to turn off the subtitles and try to pick up things from context clues. Anyway, much of the access I've had to film education has been through Criterion. And while I love that canon of cinema, your podcast covers so many aspects of film history I know virtually nothing about. Yeah, Criterion should give us a call.
I agree.
We could fill in those gaps. Through your podcast, I discovered the Kino Cult app, which has been really fun. The venereal disease scene in Mom and Dad, which I watch after hearing it mentioned on your show, really served up the moments I will never soon forget. Overboiling a hot dog is now something I fear in a whole new way. So thank you, kind of.
That's so fucked that this podcast
introduced them to Mom and Dad.
Led somebody to watching the 1948 exploitation movie, Mom and Dad.
Which, if you want more information about that, check it out on our Patreon episode. I have a long way to catch up on all the episodes, so hopefully I'm not repeating something that you've covered already, but I was wondering if you'd ever delved into the cinema of Wang Wang. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, I was wondering if a Lone Wolf and Cub marathon might be in your future. I love Wang Wang. He's a good man.
Wang Wang is fantastic. For those who don't know, Wang Wang, whose real name was Ernesto de la Cruz, was a 2'9" Filipino actor. He is best known for a movie called For Your Height Only, which was a James Bond parody in which he played the James Bond character. But he was also just a well-known novelty media figure in the Philippines at the time.
There's a very fun documentary on him that was made. And also, if you want For Your Height Only, I don't know how accessible it is, but Mondo Macabro put out on a DVD, arguably the greatest DVD of all time, because not only do you get For Your Height Only, you also get Challenge of the Tiger, which has our guys, Bruce Lee and Richard Harrison, kicking up a storm.
I love Challenge of the Tiger too.
Yeah.
But by the way, that documentary, The Search for Wang Wang, which is by a filmmaker named Andrew Leavold, it's a great documentary because it's not just about Wang Wang, but it's also about all of the Philippines exploitation movies of the time. Like, he goes to the Philippines and he meets with all these old stuntmen who worked there at the time. And also he meets with Imelda Marcos, the widow of the oppressive president Ferdinand Marcos, and he asks her about knowing Wang Wang.
Wow. And I mean, when I think of her, I think of that amazing story in the intro of Mondo Macabro, the book, where they were building the film center and it collapsed, and they said, okay, just cement over it, and any body parts that are sticking out of it, cut them off, and then cement over that. And that went fine until it opened and it started to stink.
Well, I saw Andrew Leavold do a Q&A after a screening of The Search for Wang Wang, and he said that when he showed the movie in the Philippines, he was a little worried about the stuff with Imelda Marcos because he thought the audience might be like, why are you interviewing this oppressor, this awful person? But apparently, when he said, what do you remember about Wang Wang? They all cheered because it was like, they almost saw it as a defiant gesture. Like, it's like you go up to the queen and ask about her toilet, that kind of thing, you know?
I don't want to speak too much of Filipino politics. I would not look into who is currently in power, because it may be a child of that family.
Oh, is that so? Well,
Yeah.
anyway, I'm just report. Sorry.
I thought you were going to be like, yeah, they love her. Woo!
I'm all worn out from learning about the fifth generation of Chinese filmmakers. I haven't had time to look into the Philippines.
You know what?
But
We
I
should
love
do
Wang Wang.
We should do a Filipino filmmaker, though, because I don't think we've ever touched that country.
Oh, God.
Lav Diaz is sitting right there.
Add it to the list.
So the letter finishes up with, you've given me hours of listening enjoyment. Love hearing about new stuff. Love that you approach things in such an accessible way. And spending time listening to two giant film nerds. Nerds? No one's ever called us that before. Has really toned down my need to force my siblings and friends to hear me obsess about it. So I'm sure they're grateful, too. All the best. Can't wait to hear all the episodes.
Well, thank you, but we are the two coolest people in Toronto. So.
Oh, man, we haven't called ourselves the Blue Collar Guys film podcast for a long time, but that's who we are, right?
That's right.
You know, we get off for 9 to 5, and it's time to record this podcast.
Just two Joe Lunchpail checking in, watching Raise the Red Lantern, and then checking out and going home.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that letter. As per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. What are we doing on our Patreon this week, Will?
Well, speaking of Jackie Chan, and again, Rumble in the Bronx screening April 18th at the Fox Cinema in Toronto.
We're going to be saying that every week until then, guys, so buckle up.
We are talking about Jackie Chan's classic romantic comedy, Gorgeous, from 1999, released on a brand new Blu-ray. Now, if you were in a video store in the early 2000s, you probably rented this movie and thought, this is weird. It's a romantic comedy.
And if you think, man, you know, the boys, they must have ran out of stuff to say about Jackie Chan. Wrong. We go 25 plus minutes on it.
I wish we just made this a Jackie Chan podcast. Because every single one of his movies, I think we could do 30 minutes on.
Well, here's the thing. By the end, we'll be talking about the tuxedo for the third time, and we will pass off this mortal coil. So we haven't run out of Jackie stuff to talk about. We'll keep doing it.
Far from it.
I'm shocked we've never done like the tuxedo or the Spy Next Door.
We've done I watched that movie with you at one point.
Did we?
Yeah,
Did we do
watched
an episode
it together.
I don't even
We might have
remember.
watched it as part of our Jackie episode.
I don't think I've ever seen the Spy Next Door, though.
I've seen it.
I know you probably saw it theatrically, right?
I saw it at a press screening, yes. Yes.
I'm sure it played to raucous laughter.
Oh, my God.
So, we're talking Gorgeous on the Patreon episode. $5 a month. You get that and our entire back catalog. So check it out, including, I gotta say, 5+ Jackie-themed episodes, right? Where he picked us a movie that we wanted to talk about that he made, and we just talked about that.
Years and years of content.
And next week, what are we doing, Will?
We are talking about Isaac Florentine. He is the direct-to-video king.
Yes, Action King. And Isaac Florentine, I think, is one of my favorite direct-to-video action filmmakers. And you may be asking, why did you talk about him till now yet? And it's a big subject to tackle, I feel. He's made a lot of movies. And the thing about Isaac Florentine is, it's one of those recommendations where you go, oh, you'll really like this. But, you know, there may be some stuff that's a little weaker in it. You know, just understand. But he's done everything. He did post-apocalyptic spaghetti westerns, was Gary Daniels, was Cold Harvest. His masterpiece, U.S. SEALs 2, which is choreographed by Jackie Chan's stuntman. That's right. Jackie Chan had a stuntman.
No, that's not true.
Oh, he also did, probably his most famous series is Undisputed 2 and 3, the films that really made Scott Adkins. I mean, Isaac Florentine made Scott Adkins. He's the one who, Scott Adkins had appeared in a bunch of Hong Kong movies in supporting roles, but he's the one with a movie called Special Forces that finally gave him like a big meaty role, and I've just been doing it since then. The other thing about Isaac Florentine, he's the man who cannot catch a break when it comes to like moving to the next level. He has been stuck in the Millennium Mines forever, Millennium being a production company, and he can't get out.
Truly the Edgar G. Ulmer of our age.
To the point that, like, my friend, who perhaps is a programmer, has been at festivals and gone, hey, can I see the new Isaac Florentine film? And they go, you wouldn't be interested in that.
Wow.
Yeah, so, like...
Even after all the acclaim he's gotten.
After Undisputed 3, like, played a whole bunch of festivals and won awards, he should have been made to, like, move to the next level. What was he
He should be directing Fast and Furious now.
Yeah, or The Expendables.
Yeah.
You know what he was forced to do after those movies? To make a vanity project for, like, the girlfriend of one of the heads of the company that he was making the movie for. But, you know, he's got tons of movies. He's been working since the early 90s, and he's still at it. Love the guy. So we'll probably be watching, I would say, U.S. SEALs 2, and I'll pick some other ones for Will to watch because I want to get all the flavor. He made a Dolph Lundgren kind of like wuxia-style movie called Bridge of the Dragon.
Yeah, and for my part, Isaac Florentine is somebody who I've heard about for years, have always wanted to dive into, and I think I've just been intimidated by it because there's so much stuff and I don't know what's good. So
Exactly.
let's do it.
I mean, Undisputed 3 has two John Wick 4 actors in it. Mark Zaror, who plays like the main guy that Keanu Reeves fights, and Scott Adkins.
Scott Adkins is kind of Florentine's Bobby De Niro.
Yeah, absolutely. And they still work together to this day, so they clearly have a close relationship.
All right, I'm excited. It's going to be fun.
So that's what we're going to be doing next week. Until then, my name's Justin Clue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening.
Well, I saw John Wick 4 this week. I know you saw it too. Something that...
First day.
Yeah.
First show they had. I was there.
Of course you were. Something that impressed me was Donnie Yen. I mean, obviously Donnie Yen's great, but it's so different than it used to be. Like, it used to be that Chow Yun-fat would come and make a movie in America, and he would basically just be there to be the straight man to Sean William Scott. And they'd be like, you know, Jackie Chan would come to make a movie in America, and it'd be like, Jackie, you know, you got to tone down the fight scenes for Western audiences. We can only have like a 3-minute fight scene.
That commentary on the Medallion DVD, that's the two producers, and they're like, oh, this scene ran so much longer, but we're like, Jackie, you got to cut this down. You can't, it's like, what are you doing?
So much has happened since then. I mean, first of all, so many, like Police Story is on the Criterion Channel.
Well, you know, Donnie, he did all that stuff, right? His like first technically English language feature film role was in Highlander Endgame, the fourth Highlander movie.
And I mean, he'd been making movies since the 80s. I mean, it's amazing he's bigger than ever now because he's like probably 60.
Yeah, well, the thing about, and in constant pain, the thing about Donnie is that like he was a guy that basically was able to move forward because like people like Yu Ping just believed in him. Because like the first few films didn't do that well. And Yu Ping kept bringing him back, putting him in movies. And what really made Donnie were the Ip Man films.
Right.
And like those were so massive that he's basically been kind of like accepted by the Chinese Communist Party as like,
Actually?
you know, a representative.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, you haven't seen all those photos of him like smiling in front of like all the government officials?
I mean, I knew that he was like friendly with the mainland authorities for sure.
His newer movies that are made like out of China and places like, they're fine. Like, I don't know if you saw Big Brother, the one where he's a teacher.
No, I
and
didn't.
he fights. We saw Enter the Fat Dragon together.
I saw Enter the Fat Dragon, yes.
But that was more of a Hong Kong Wong Jing kind of like, you know, quickie project.
But anyway, in John Wick 4, I think he's excellent. And what's
so good.
And what's great is what's so different than it was 20 years ago is the movie has a baseline assumption. You know Donnie Yen. You love Donnie Yen. You've seen the Ip Man movies on Netflix, and you're going to want to see him actually do his stuff and fight and also be cool, have some actory stuff that he can do.
Well, this is the thing about John Wick 4 that I find so fascinating is like what Donnie Yen is now in kind of like the popular imagination, I get the sense, is the Ip Man character. Very stoic and serious, and that's how he's kind of portrayed in all of the subsequent films that he made. That's not who Donnie Yen was earlier. Like, he was arrogant, he was kind of like, you know, he thought he was awesome, he was always kind of twitchy and angry, and weirdly, that's the Donnie Yen we got in XXX3, The Return of Xander Cage, and the one that we get in John Wick 4 as well. And I wonder if it's like the director, like, know what Donnie can do.
I think clearly does. I mean, the director, I don't know a lot about him except that he's obviously a cinephile.
Well, yeah, he's been a stuntman since the early 90s. So.
I mean, I know he's also said, I mean, in addition to just all the references to martial arts movies, the fact that he has Scott Adkins in the movie speaks to his expertise in that. But also, I mean, I know he's spoken of the influence of Buster Keaton on the movies.
Yeah.
I also think, like, the staircase scene is obviously Laurel and Hardy, the music box.
The music box? Don't you mean the Three Stooges and the ice? Did they create it, Will?
An ache in every steak? Yeah.
And they perfected it.
Okay, I was showing an ache in every steak to someone recently. And,
yes.
And like,
I could take a guess who that is.
Yeah. The moment when the guy comes out of the car and says, I brought this big cake, never fails to kill.
Oh, did it even killed him or they? We don't know who it could be.
Yeah. So fun.
That is such a great short. And I think what's interesting about these John Wick movies is that, like, by 4, they're almost like exercises in, like, what are the action stuff we always wanted to do? And, like, audience, I don't want to say be damned, but, like, I was telling someone, okay, there's technically only 3 action scenes in John Wick.
The first one?
The fourth one. If you say, this is when action starts, this is when the action ends and the story continues. There's only 3 action scenes. There's in the Tokyo Motel, there's in Scott Adkins' bar, and there's the climax. But within those scenes, there's 5 separate set pieces with completely different ideas.
So I was going to say, you know, just a friendly criticism of the movie. And I feel bad saying this because you're looking at this movie that has so much skill and so much, you know, like it's incredible some of the stuff that's in this movie. The opening, like, Tokyo stuff, I thought was the weakest.
Really?
Yes, because obviously it's virtuosic, but there got to be a point, it's so long, and there's a bit of a sameness to a lot of it, where it's just like, bunch of guys come out. John Wick murks them all.
Yeah.
And it felt very video game-ish to me.
I felt like that in John Wick 2, where I was like, he just moaned down. But like, I felt John Wick kept changing it up. Like there were different things that he had to do the entire time.
Well, I mean, I thought the movie, I liked the stuff at Scott Adkins' bar, but I really got on the movie side in Paris.
When there's like the fight where they're like are they at the Arc
de Triomphe, yeah, with all that stuff. I mean, it's pretty impressive. And the staircase scene, I think, is just a great idea.
I think that staircase scene, and even the way that it's executed, action, like classic. I think that people will be like, we need something like that staircase scene, in the same way people would talk about The Raid in the context of the action that they do.
Yeah, so for me, that movie, I started a little iffy on it, and then it kept getting better for me as it went along.
I mean, I think a lot has to do with Donnie Yen too. Oh yeah. Every time he shows up on screen, we're like, we just want a movie about Donnie Yen.
Well, actually, the other thing I like about it is that all of the actors in the movie, like Hiroyuki Sanada and Scott Adkins, everyone like gets to pop. Everyone gets to do something. I think Keanu Reeves is a very generous leading man. He's very confident in himself.
Haven't you seen him carrying those bags up the stairs?
Yeah.
There was something. Oh, that's right. That's what triggered the Mike Myers "Don't look him in the eye" thing. Was that video of Keanu Reeves like helping on set, where people were like, is it that big a deal that the actor helps on set? I mean, number one, yes, because you're technically breaking union rules.
Oh, interesting.
But I think because they're in France, that probably doesn't apply.
Okay.
Which is where they shot that, and he was just being helpful in that way. But there's that story of Kevin Smith being on the set of Mallrats being like, do I need to help you guys bring stuff out? And they're like, no, you're the director. What are you talking about? Because he just didn't know any better.
And he still hasn't learned how to direct.
No, well, that's not the lesson about that. But so Donnie Yen, really fun in this movie. I hope he is pushed more in that direction. Like, I don't need him to make American films, though.
No.
But at the same time, in China, it seems like they want him to do a specific thing. Like, I saw the new movie he directed, The Wuxia, and he's so boring and, like, stoic in the films. Like, let Donnie have fun. Like, let him be a wild man and say stuff like, fuck you, to someone who's trying to interrupt him.
Completely agree.